Welcome to Ancient History Uncoded, where myths hide secrets and the past is never silent. This is where the deep lore really shines. In the standard Sunday school retelling, Jesus is arrested by a handful of temple guards, a small police action in the middle of the night. But in the original Greek text of John, the scale is massive. It wasn't a squad, it was a spera, a Roman cohort. We are talking about hundreds of battle-hardened soldiers marching on a single unarmed man. In the Synoptic Gospels, it looks like a tragedy. But in John, brute force failed. It required a display of absolute authority to even get close enough to put cuffs on him. To understand the event in Gethsemane, we have to look at the tactical reality of Jerusalem during Passover. The city is a powder keg. The population swells from 50,000 to over 200,000 pilgrims. The Roman occupiers are paranoid. They are terrified of a messianic uprising. So when Judas approaches the authorities, they don't send a beat cop. They launch a military operation. John 18:3 tells us Judas arrived with a detachment of soldiers and officers from the chief priests and Pharisees. They came with lanterns, torches, and weapons. This was a shock and awe campaign designed to crush a rebellion before it could start. But what they found in that garden wasn't a rebel leader hiding in a cave. It was an entity that didn't need a sword to bring an army to its knees. Let's look at the numbers. The word used in John 18:3 is spera, sigma pi epsilon y rho alpha. In the Roman military structure, a spera is a cohort. A full legion consists of 10 cohorts. A standard cohort is 480 men, 6 centuries of 80 soldiers each. If this was an auxiliary cohort, it could be anywhere from 500 to 1,000 men. Even if we take the most conservative scholarly estimate, assuming it was a maniple or a detachment of the cohort, we are still looking at minimum 200 Roman heavy infantry, plus the Jewish temple police, hyperetai. And we know this wasn't just a low-level skirmish because John 18:12 explicitly mentions a chiliarchos, chi iota lambda alpha rho chi omicron sigma. A chiliarch is a tribune, a commander of 1,000. You do not send a high-ranking military tribune into a dark garden at midnight unless you are expecting a war. They knew they couldn't fight a miracle worker with standard tactics. They had heard the stories. This was a man who reportedly controlled the weather and raised the dead. If the rumors were true, a few guards wouldn't cut it. They brought an army to fight a carpenter. The disparity in force is comical until you realize who was actually in control of the situation. Imagine the scene. It's pitch black. The Kidron Valley is deep and shadowed. Suddenly the silence is broken by the sound of hundreds of boots, the clattering of armor, and a sea of torches flooding into the garden. The text says they came with lanterns and torches. This is significant. It was a full moon during Passover. Visibility should have been decent, but they brought artificial light because they expected him to hide. They expected a chase. They were ready to drag a fugitive out from the cave or the bush. But in John's account, the stealth element fails immediately, not because the soldiers were loud, but because the target didn't run. John 18:4 says, Jesus, knowing all that was going to happen to him, went out. He stepped into the light. This completely disrupted their tactical advantage. An arrest team relies on surprise and overwhelming speed. By stepping forward, Jesus seized the initiative. He asks them a simple question. Who is it you want? They answer, Jesus of Nazareth. Note the disconnect here. They are facing a man who fits the description, standing right in front of them, yet they don't grab him. They are hesitant. There is a tension in the air, a hesitation that suggests they are terrified of what this man might do. They have the swords, but he has the presence. This is where the narrative shifts from a military procedural to a theological revelation. Jesus answers their identification check with two words in Greek, ego eimi. In English, your Bible likely translates this as I am he. They add the word he to make the sentence grammatically smooth. But the he is not in the Greek. Jesus simply says, I am. For a Jewish audience and for the spiritual reality John is portraying, this is nuclear. Ego eimi is the Greek translation of the divine name revealed to Moses at the burning bush in Exodus 3:14. I am who I am. Throughout the Gospel of John, Jesus uses this phrase to identify himself with the absolute reality of God. I am the bread of life. I am the light of the world. But here, there is no predicate. It is the absolute, unqualified claim to divinity. The moment he speaks these words, the laws of physics seem to bend to the weight of his authority. He doesn't pull a weapon. He doesn't call down fire, though he later mentions he could summon 12 legions of angels. He simply speaks his identity. In Hesiod's Theogony, Zeus wins through sheer power, lightning bolts, and thunder. But here the victory is won through identity. The voice that spoke creation into existence speaks into the darkness of the garden. John 18:6 records the reaction. When Jesus said, I am he, they drew back and fell to the ground. This is one of the most overlooked verses in the Passion narrative. We often picture the arrest as Jesus being meekly grabbed, but the text describes a kinetic reaction. A Roman cohort, hundreds of disciplined, combat-ready veterans, recoils. Why did they fall? Some skeptics argue it was just the people in the front stumbling in the dark, causing a domino effect. But these are trained legionaries. They don't just trip over their own feet because a peasant spoke to them. The text implies an involuntary reaction to divine power. It's a shock wave. When the uncreated God identifies himself, the created beings cannot stand. It represents the total incompatibility of human force with divine authority. They came to arrest a criminal, and they found themselves flat on their backs before a king. This moment proves a critical theological point. Jesus was not a victim of the Roman Empire. He was not a victim of the Jewish plot. At any moment, he could have walked away. If a single word knocked an army flat, he could have left them there and ascended to the Mount of Olives. They couldn't fight him. If they couldn't even stand up in his presence, they certainly couldn't arrest him against his will. So the army is on the ground. Jesus is standing. The disciples are watching. This is the moment where, in any other myth, the hero would strike. He would scatter the enemy and escape. But this is where the strategy shifts. Jesus allows them to stand back up. He repeats the question, "Who do you want?" They answer again, likely terrified this time, "Jesus of Nazareth." And then the negotiation. Jesus says, "I told you that I am he. If you're looking for me, then let these men go." This was the heist. This was the objective. He wasn't trying to save his own life. He was negotiating the safety of his friends. He used the display of power that I am to prove that he was the one in charge, solely to leverage that authority to secure safe passage for the disciples. He knocked them down to show them that he was surrendering voluntarily. It was a message. I am coming with you because I choose to, not because you forced me. And my condition is that my friends walk free." The Roman commander, the Chiliarch, likely realized he had no choice. If this man wanted to leave, he would leave. If he was willing to come quietly in exchange for the release of the others, you take that deal. The arrest in Gethsemane wasn't a defeat. It was a transaction. Jesus traded his freedom for theirs. He demonstrated that the might of Rome, the Iron Legion, the torchlight, the authority of Caesar was nothing compared to the breath of God. He didn't lose the fight in the garden. He laid down his weapon to win the war. Perhaps a bit of thievery magic. Subscribe to Ancient History Uncoded and uncover the secrets of the past.